Hey all, Ron here from Military Images Magazine with a new episode of Life on the Civil War Research Trail. You know, we Americans love our sports: baseball, football, basketball, soccer, motorsports. The list is long, and thanks to the digital age we live in, it's all easily accessible from the click of a button or the swipe of a screen on your favorite device. But back in the 19th century, well, we love sports with the same passion, the same level of enthusiasm. However, the mix of sporting events was a bit limited compared to today's options. One of the more popular was target shooting. Our American ancestors, followed target shooting with rapt attention. Sport target shooting, those people, those athletes who participated in it, they had to have some special skills. They had to be disciplined because constant practice was needed. They had to have a technical mastery of their weapons. They had to understand how they worked. They had to be comfortable with them. They had to be mentally tough. They had to control their breathing. They had to control their minds. And they had to be physically fit. Sound familiar? No different than today's finest elite athletes. Well, now let's go back to the 19th century. One of the most memorable target shooting matches occurred in Covington, Kentucky in April of 1848. The event spotlighted two of the country's leading marksmen. You students of the Civil War will know one man by name, Hiram Berdan. He was a 23-year-old upstart from New York, taking on the veteran marksman Horus E. Dimick, who was a 39-year-old Vermonter. The competition was grueling, mentally tough. The fans watched with excitement, quiet enthusiasm as it unfolded. And when the targets were all said and done and the shooting was over, the young man, Hiram Berdan, had beaten the veteran Horus Dimick. Now, flash forward 13 years to 1861, so a rematch of sorts occurred. Berdan, still young, now 35, recruited sharpshooters for the Union Army, forming two regiments armed with Sharps rifles. Berdan commanded them as colonel. As they were popularly known, Berdan's sharpshooters became a household name in the East. Following the war, he lived a long life, didn't die until 1893, had a notable career as an engineer and a weapon-focused inventor. Berdan's name recognition remains high to all of you students of the Civil War, and the name Berdan is synonymous with accuracy, precision, and quality. The other man is a name that perhaps many of you don't know. He's been largely forgotten by history. Horus Dimick, he was 52 when the Civil War began. He was a man who was known as and had a reputation as an amiable and a social person by his nature. I mentioned he was from Vermont. He left his home state for Lexington, Kentucky, about 1839, and went into the cabinet and upholstery business. But gunsmithing proved his true calling, his true love, and by the 1840s, his work had caught the attention of civilians and the military. In 1849, just a year after that contest, that target shooting contest that he lost to Berdan, Dimick moved again, this time settling in St. Louis, where he opened a gun store, further pursuing his passion. He invented his own brand of long arm, which was known by several names: the Dimick target rifle, the American deer and target rifle, or simply the Plains rifle. It was particularly well known for its artistry, and you can see some of them pictured here. graceful lines, and a deep butt. It was extremely popular with hunters in the Midwest back then, sort of the Western frontier. In fact, according to one report, it possessed, quote, extraordinary shooting qualities varying from the mark in the hands of a good shot, not more, on an average, than 6 inches in a quarter of a mile range, end quote. The fame preceded him. In 1861, he demonstrated that target rifle at the headquarters of Major General John C. Fremont, the Pathfinder, the first Republican nominee for President of the United States. Fremont had organized a regiment on par with Berdan's elite sharpshooters as a result of the meeting that they had. The government also contracted with Dimick to provide his rifle to this new regiment, which was commanded by Colonel John W. Burge, and it was known as the Western Sharpshooters. The organizers intended Dimick's rifles to be part of the soldiers' distinctive look, which included hunter's dress, bearskin bullet pouches, powder flasks, and squirrel-tailed caps. In the end, that fanciful uniform that the organizers had in their mind never materialized, never came to existence. So, as you can see, the men pictured here, they received standard military uniforms, but they also did receive the Dimick rifles. But not all of them. About 200 men of the roughly 1,000-man regiment opted for Henry repeating rifles, and they purchased them out of their own pocket. The men of the Western Sharpshooters were recruited from 7 Midwest states, and the regiment ultimately became part of the Union service as the 66th Illinois Infantry because the majority of the men were recruited from that state. 4 of those men are pictured here. There's the Hollis Brothers, and they all served together in Company I of the 66th, and they all survived the war. From the left, there is Ira, Clark, Nelson, and Francis, the Hollis brothers. The Hollises and their fellow marksmen began their service at Benton Barracks in St. Louis in November 1861, went on a fight at Fort Donelson, Shiloh, Corinth, the battles for Atlanta, the March to the Sea, and the Carolinas campaign, a long list of operations. Dimick's rifles remained in service through a good chunk of the war up into the Atlanta campaign, when by that point they had become unserviceable due to use and exposure to the weather and other elements. They were eventually replaced by Springfield muskets and more of the Henry rifles. Though the Dimicks did not survive the war, they did contribute to fulfilling the promise of that 1861 recruitment excitement as they were recruited as the Regiment of the West. Now, you may wonder what happened to Horus Dimick. Well, after the wartime excitement of his rifles making their way into a regiment, a Western sharpshooting regiment, he went and spent the rest of his days in St. Louis. In May 1873, that store that he had started went into bankruptcy, and he died 3 months later at age 64. His wife and 2 children survived him. So there's a story of Horus Dimick, a name who is lost to most folks in the wake of the history of the Civil War. His Dimick rifle had a loyal but a relatively small following in the Midwest. But they did touch the men, the Western Sharpshooters of the 66th Illinois Infantry Sharpshooters. So thanks for listening. We'll see you on the next episode of Life on the Civil War Research Trail.